Innsmouth, stranger.
Good day to you travellers, and welcome to episode 42 of the Innsmouth Book Club. I'm one of your guides, Rob Poyton.
I'm one of the other ones, Tim Mendes.
And I'm John Chadwick.
We're going to be visiting the Innsmouth Book Shoppe on today's tour, courtesy of Tim.
Indeed.
But before we go in there, I believe there's a couple of things we just want to talk about. Tim, I understand you escaped from Innsmouth recently and spent a weekend in London.
I did, yeah. I escaped for the weekend and stayed at probably one of the most surreal hotels I've ever stayed in my life. It was like I ran as part of a chain, but instead of having the ground floor where it should be, so it was ground floor in the lift, but there was no first floor.
Yeah.
So the first time I got in, it was just like it went straight from ground floor to second floor. Because obviously this American chain, but instead of changing it from, because obviously they number it 1, 2, 3 and on, and we go ground 1, 2, 3 and on. It's like they just put the ground button and forgot about fucking first floor. It confused the shit out of me.
So did you think you'd gone through some sort of temporal portal or something like that then?
Yeah, it was a really strange experience. It's like the hotels were like some weird liminal space. It was really bizarre, but it was a big sci-fi and fantasy convention, and it was good. It was good fun. There's some interesting stuff going on. Managed to pick up far too many books. So then I was on a real mission to sell after that. So I had to make some room in my suitcase. Got nice big hardbacks of M.R. James ghost stories and stuff like that. It was like, I've got to make room.
So did you have your own stall there and that kind of thing?
I did indeed, yeah. Flogging my latest novella and basically a whole bunch of stuff, and did pretty well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
nice.
Not too bad. Yeah. Considering it was like, I would say, the majority, a good like 95% people there were there for sci-fi and fantasy. And then tucked away in the back room, there was me and Flame Tree Press.
Right.
Who were obviously flogging the new Ramsey Campbell.
Right.
So it was kind of like, let's stick the horror guys out of the way where nobody knows where they are.
Well, is there really that sort of division still?
Yeah.
It's like horror as the poor cousin or something, looked down upon a bit.
We are, we're sort of the embarrassing uncle. You know, the one they lock away in the attic, you know.
And it's strange because surely, I mean, I read science fiction, I read fantasy, I read horror, I read thrillers.
Yeah,
who divides it up like that?
It's strange. No, I would say that most people are cool, but you do get the odd raised eyebrow and the odd look down the nose sort of thing, you know.
Well, we sacrificed those people today gone here, so...
Exactly. I'll take a shog off in my suitcase next time.
So I'm surprised by it. I thought that horror was probably the biggest genre across the board. The amount of people that I know that read horror novels that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, it was strange.
Well, you'd have thought so in films, wouldn't you? I mean, I suppose we're seeing more fantasy TV shows and that kind of thing now, but horror stuff is just tenner-penny.
Yeah, I think it was because it used to be like the sci-fi, fantasy and horror convention.
Right.
But they've sort of locked the and horror off now.
Perhaps they ran out of letters on the sign, ran out of space.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, because there is specific horror ones, and but there was other horror writers there and all that, so I wasn't alone in the attic, you know.
Did you see Garth Marenghi there? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, Garth Marenghi. Nice.
Another thing I wanted to mention just before we start today is our old friend Robert Lloyd Parry of Nunky Productions is doing a tour called H.P. Lovecraft's Gallery of Screams.
Oh, yes.
And that's running through the whole of June. I believe Robert is going to be performing Pickman's Model and the music of Eric Zahn.
Oh, nice.
And that's quite a few dates spread over the whole of June. He's going to be visiting Sheffield, York, Cambridge, Bath, Reading, and lots of other places as well. So if you haven't seen Robert perform before, of course he's most well known for doing his M.R. James performances, then really worth going to see. So of course we'll put the link up to that in the show notes below.
Interestingly, that hardback, it's big shiny hardback of M.R. James ghost stories from Flame Tree Press. He's done the foreword.
Oh right, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's done that. He's got a nice little piece in there. So
brilliant. And one final thing we just wanted to let you know before we go into the shop was that the three of us had a day trip last week.
Yeah.
Yes, we visited Oleander, courtesy of our friends at the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos podcast. David and DB invited us along, and we had a lovely chat about Innsmouth in all its glory. We also saw our old friend Ralph the Emotional Support Rooster, and had a very interesting experience with a large number of baby goats, which was quite surreal. Anyway, we'll put the link up to that below. And of course, it's an excellent podcast. The guys recently had an interview with Ramsey Campbell, which was a great listen. So we'll put that link up below for you. Okay, I think it's time to go in the shop, don't you?
Indeed. Make yourselves at home. Yeah, just, if you find any puddles of goop, just don't step in it,
You mean looking at the tractor magazines again?
Yeah.
Under the counter.
In the back room.
Yeah. My cold print room at the back, yeah.
Oh, dear. So the author we're looking at today is certainly a name that I recognise, and I'm sure I must have read at least some of his stories, but I don't know very much about him, although he was a member of the Lovecraft Circle, and he was a very prolific writer, and that is Henry Kuttner.
Yeah, he's quite an interesting chap. He's one of the little known of the circle, which is interesting because he's actually really well known in the sci-fi world for things like The Fury and things like that, which were really big. But he wrote a whole bunch of mythos stuff. A bit like people like Robert Bloch, he kind of started out doing mythos stuff. It's really good stuff. I first came across him in Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos. I think the Salem Horror was in that.
Yeah.
And Chaosium put out a collection of all his mythos tales, the Book of Iod.
Oh, right. I've not seen that.
Yeah, it's hard to get hold of, but you can get hold of the Kindle edition of it really easily. But the actual physical book is it's one of those that's a bit like rocking horse shit. So you go on eBay and you're looking at a good couple of £100. It's bloody ridiculous. But it's well worth tracking down.
So Kutner was born in Los Angeles in 1915, and he was quite young when he started writing to Lovecraft, but he quickly became part of the Lovecraft Circle, and it was through the circle that he met his wife, C.L. Moore, also a very famous author, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially known for her sort of fantasy and sword and sorcery. I think Jurel of Dwari was one of her main characters.
I really didn't know that. Yeah.
The Black God's Kiss, that's a great SNS story.
That is a great one, yeah.
Yeah, it's on our list of stories to be covered, that one, I think.
It's an interesting name for a horror writer, isn't it? C.L. Moore.
A bit like Helen Back, you mean?
Helen Back, yeah. That's the young ones, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah. So the pair of them often wrote together, and perhaps one reason why Kutner is not more well known than he is they often wrote under pseudonyms.
Yes.
Although he was certainly well known and highly regarded amongst his peers, Robert Matheson dedicated I Am Legend to him, and William Burroughs quoted him as well in some of his work.
Mm.
And I think, as you said there, Tim, he did contribute a lot to the mythos as well.
Yeah.
So the story we're looking at today is his first published story, and that's 1936 in Weird Tales, and it's The Graveyard Rats.
Oh, yes.
And straight away, I know we're all going to say band name.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And of course, there is a band that has taken that one. I mean, that's too good to pass up, isn't it, that one?
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what genre they are, but I like to imagine with a name like that, they're a psychobilly band.
Oh, yeah. You got a proper... that'd be brilliant. Yeah, good old psychobilly or death rock kind of band. Yeah. A bit like the Cramps.
Yes, now you're talking. Yeah. All right, so if we crack into the story, and I've not read this one before. It didn't ring any bells at all.
You know?
No, I don't think I've read it before.
It's one that's always stuck with me just because it's one of those that just plays on so many fears. And it's just so immediate and there's no pissing about. It's just bang, have it. Yeah.
I think it was possibly the most nihilistic story I've ever read. There was no hope at all.
Yeah, none.
And the protagonist wasn't even nice.
Yeah.
I had no empathy for him. And it was just horrible.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And our main character is this old mason who's the caretaker at one of Salem's oldest cemeteries. And I love the fact that we're straight away in Salem.
Yeah, I like the fact with this that it like, because Kuttner set a lot of his stuff actually in Salem, which is really interesting, because Arkham was basically an analog for Salem, wasn't it?
Yes,
A lot of people think that Arkham was basically Lovecraft's take on Salem. And it's really interesting because the description with the sagging gambrel roofs and everything, it is exactly the same as how Lovecraft describes Arkham. So
yeah, we certainly get that lovely Lovecraftian description of the town, don't we, and the architecture.
Yeah,
and it's nice to hear that without there's no real overt mythos stuff initially or in this. I think, is the Necronomicon mentioned at one point?
Yeah, there's a few things as we go along, because it's one of those that's implied but not overtly done. And I think it's a very clever way of mixing it in, because doesn't like beat you over the head with a shopping list.
Yeah. We don't have that Derlethian sort of list of names and all that sort of stuff, do we?
No, but it gets the point there, I think. Yeah.
And I like this nice little mention we get at the start where all the former caretakers have disappeared, but no one really knows where they've gone. And also we get a description or an idea of the rats that he can see, these huge amount of rats. But there's also this implication or this sort of vague description that the cemetery is riddled with these huge burrows as well. Not just normal rat burrows, but huge burrows.
Yeah. Well, this is where you get the first sort of hints of what I'm talking about. You got the tales of moribund inhuman life that was said to exist in forgotten burrows in the earth. And the elders declared that there were worse things than rats and maggots crawling in the unhallowed earth of the ancient Salem cemeteries.
Nice.
So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's ghouls, isn't it?
Perhaps even worse than ghouls.
Yeah, but there's this passage here that says to me that it is basically, it's ghouls, because he'd heard vague rumours of ghoulish beings that dwelt far underground and that had the power of commanding the rats, marshalling them like horrible armies. The rats were messengers between this world and the grim and ancient caverns far below Salem. Bodies were stolen from graves for nocturnal subterranean feasts.
That's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we get the ghouls, but then perhaps there's this sort of link in with Dreamlands, I wonder.
Yeah.
Because we know that the ghouls can sort of go into an earthly cemetery and they go through these burrows and underground, and they can pop out into dream worlds as well.
There is an interesting thing, a reference to the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which I thought, and obviously the suggestion is that it's the ghouls that led the rats away, not the Pied Piper. But that story has got such a wonderful end, where this doorway in a mountain opens up and there's like another land inside. It's like it has that liminal space thing going on. So maybe that is an absolute connection there to the Dreamlands. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah,
and we get a reference here as well to the pits of Avernus.
Yes,
which was mentioned in the Aeneid. And that's a volcanic crater with a large lake in it, which was believed to be an entrance to the underworld. And apparently the lake gave off such poisonous fumes that any birds flying over it would instantly fall down dead.
Again, this liminality, this threshold sort of thing.
There's also, I mean, there's a really interesting reference to Cotton Mather as well, who, if people don't know, he was the person who was one of the main... Yeah, the main people judging the witches in the witch trial. And it mentions, it says, the old days when Cotton Mather had hunted down the evil cults that worshipped Hecate and the dark Magna Mater in frightful orgies. So it still has got that grounding in witchcraft that Lovecraft does do. Yeah. Hecate... I can't remember exactly which mythology she comes from, but it was often that they sacrificed dogs to her.
I think she was Greek. I'm pretty sure she was a Greek goddess.
And as for the Magna Mater, I presume that was talking about some kind of earth goddess thing. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, well, in Lovecraftian lore, the Magna Mater is often tied in with Shubby, with old Shub-Niggurath.
Right.
That's, yeah. So there's another connection there. Yeah.
Well, it's that nice thing again that Lovecraft does, isn't it? Where you mix these ancient mythological beings, sort of overlaid onto the mythos, and they're almost they're kind of like a faint echo of the real horror that lies beneath the actual mythos horror. And the other thing that this reminded me of was I did my Innsmouth excursion when we were down in Devon. We visited Buckfastleigh Church, which is an old abandoned church that has a huge amount of legends and hauntings surrounding it.
I love that place. Yeah.
It's one of the places that was an influence for Hound of the Baskervilles, for example. And underneath it are these huge caverns under the moors.
Yeah.
And right under the church, there's said to be a strange shaped stalactite that looks like Squire Cabell, who's entombed directly above. So again, that feeling of a very old abandoned place with these caverns and burrows beneath it.
There's a lot of that in Devon. I lived in Devon for a long time, and you'd be surprised how many old cemeteries and churches have caverns and things under them. Same with Cornwall. It's all like Swiss cheese down there, isn't it?
Is this all for smuggling?
Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah,
Right.
especially in Cornwall, it's all smugglers' tunnels. Well, this is why I've set my stuff there, because it's like there's already the smuggler tunnels. I can just stick some ghouls and a shog off down there, sort of.
Nice, yeah.
There's Robin Hood's Bay up here, which is the same. And it was on TV not so long back, and there was some guy saying basically, the smuggling hasn't been around for several hundred years. And I was thinking, that's rubbish, because I remember a ship going down just off the coast, and everyone on the beach picking up resin. that had come in on the tide. So it seemed to me that basically that the smuggling hadn't ended at all, and that obviously that those tunnels were still being used for bringing in dope.
It's classic Scooby-Doo, isn't it? Where the bad guys or the smugglers or whatever they are invent this ghost story, or even sort of fake a ghost in order to keep people away.
Well, over here, there's the legend of Captain Clegg, isn't it, which became a Hammer movie. That's the Romney Marshes.
Oh yeah, it was Peter Cushing, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was a ghost apparently, and all the rest of it, and he wasn't. He was actually a local vicar. So
it was mentioned in a Pink Floyd song as well, wasn't it? Captain Clegg and his wooden leg.
Yeah, that's Corporal Clegg.
Oh, Corporal Clegg. Further around Whitby Way, there's a place called Saltersgate, where there was a legendary inn there, which has now been turned into flats, and there was a fireplace there which you were never ever to put out, because there was supposed to be one story was that the devil was buried underneath it, and if you put the fire out, the devil would come out from this into earth. Nice. And the most famous one though is that it's a customs and excise man that was murdered and was buried under there, so you didn't put the fire out because then the authorities would know. So yeah, legendary Saltersgate Inn. It was on Fortune TV episode many years back.
Yeah. So that's what I was getting at the start of the story, was this classic old haunted cemetery vibe.
Yeah.
Because the thing is with old Masson is whether something is happening there or not, he is certainly up to no good, because he's basically robbing the graves, right? That's his stage name, Robin Graves.
He's basically like the love child of Burke and Hare and Old Man Steptoe. That's kind of...
Well, there is talk of body snatching, right? You know, that is mentioned, I think.
Yeah.
There is, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Resurrection Man, yeah.
So not only is he thieving the gold teeth and jewellery and other bits and pieces, he's doing a nice little sideline in Resurrection in as well, yeah. And is there a time mentioned for this? There's no specific time period, I don't think, is there?
No, it never mentions it.
It's kind of a timeless tale, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, because, I mean, it's one of those that it just could be any old time, because there's only one character, isn't there? It's like there's no interaction with anybody else except the rats. So, yeah.
I'll tell you what this completely reminded me of. I've been playing Fallout 4 a lot lately, and there was a story in that where you end up going into a canning factory.
Yep.
Do you remember this, Tim? And the bloke who's running it has basically been chopping feral ghouls up and putting them into his canned meat. He's been claiming that it was mole rats, but you have to go in to the tunnels to sort everything out. only to find out that he basically said, "Do not go into the basement," after all, which I forgot about, and then you've got to take him out.
Yeah.
But it was a great little chapter. But there's so many Lovecraft references in that game.
Oh yeah, well the Dunwich Borers and all that. I mean,
Pickens
that actually runs through the whole series. The Dunwich thing, Dunwich Mining Company. Yeah.
And I suppose from the Lovecraft perspective, the other thing this put me in mind of was the Lurking Fear, of course, with the tunnels as well. That same sort of feel.
Yeah.
And I really love this bit where he gets a new customer, a fresh customer, and he's itching to dig this guy up because he spotted he had some nice gear on him. But the pesky mourner keeps turning up. I think it's the guy's son, and he keeps turning up every day or every night to pay respects to his dad.
Yeah, I love that bit.
And he has to wait until this huge storm, this terrible rainy night where we've got yellow mud and everything else, and that's when he goes out to dig the old man up. And the descriptions are so vivid, it's so atmospheric, it puts you in mind immediately of sort of, it's a Corman-esque graveyard, you know, it's premature burial or it's comedy of terrors. You can really visualise that sort of scene.
And I love the fact that it's describing like the last sprinkling of wet earth on the heap beside the pit and the rain and everything, and then there's this furtive movement below his feet. Yeah, it's great. I just think, he's done a really good job of setting the scene there with these soggy black clouds and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and he eventually gets down to the coffin and opens it, and then we get this almost farcical scene where as he opens the coffin, the body is disappearing headfirst through a hole.
Yeah.
He kind of dives at it to grab the legs.
I love the fact that he ended up wrestling for the shoe.
Such a good image, isn't it?
He ends up stood in an empty coffin with a shoe in his hand.
Yeah, it's a corpse tug of war. Yeah,
there is something a bit humorous about that in a very dark way. And it feels really like a comedy of terrors or something, doesn't it?
There is. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Again, it's that quite sort of Poe-esque or the Roger Corman feel, isn't it? Grisly but funny at the same time. And then Lovecraft writes something sort of along similar lines. It was he the Undertaker? He was doing something to the corpses, and it ends up with him standing on the coffin trying to get out. Yeah,
but the guy's been sawing the feet off of the people that fit them in. Yeah, in the tomb.
That's the one. Yeah, in the tomb. Yeah. So what does he do? It's funny that he's got such this sense of entitlement to this corpse's belongings that he loses it. Right?
Well, he flies into a rage, doesn't he? He's like, bastard rats.
It's a horrible thought, and I really have got Old Man Steptoe in my head now doing this.
And this sense of outrage, even though he's the robber, he feels he's being robbed. This sense of outrage is so great, it prompts him to dive headfirst in and follow the rats in this burrow, which it's never going to end well, is it?
No,
really?
No. With his trusty revolver. Yeah.
And there's such a lovely line when he gets in the burrow. It says, "Fears crawled maggot-like into his mind," which is just such a lovely layering of his physical situation, what actually goes on in the cemetery, and also his emotional state as well. Really nice.
Yeah. There's some brilliant descriptive pieces in this. It's just,
So he's following this corpse through the burrows, squirming through the burrows, and of course there's more and more rats appearing. They start to swarm a bit, and he sees what he thinks is a large rat amongst them, a larger bulk. So he fires his gun to scare them off, and he deafens himself a bit in the process, which I thought was a nice touch.
It's a lovely touch, yeah.
I pictured that sort of modern trope in films when there's a loud noise or an explosion and you just get that ooh from the character's perspective. That definitely.
A Steptoe with his finger in his ear.
So now he's entombed in mud. He's scrambling along. He's surrounded, and now he's deaf as well.
Yeah, because it's about that time when he realises because he was so cheesed off that the rats. Because it's happened a few times. It says that the rats have beaten him to it, so he's not having it anymore, and he's gone in a blind rage, and then he's got halfway down this tunnel and realised he couldn't turn round.
Yeah, so the real claustrophobia aspect starts to kick in now. He realises he can't turn round, and the rats come back, and he fires his gun. I think a couple more times this happens. The rats approach him, and he fires his gun and scares them off a couple of times at least.
He does. Yes.
But they come back again, and there's something else with them this time. Yes, he sees something even worse than the rats. And this bit really was horrible.
For a second, he thought it was a mass of earth that had been dislodged from the roof, and then he recognized it as a human body. It was a brown and shriveled mummy. With dreadful, unbelieving shock, Masson realized that it was moving. The passionless death-head skull of a long-dead corpse, instinct with hellish life, and the glazed eyes, swollen and bulbous, betrayed the thing's blindness. It made a faint groaning sound as it crawled towards Masson, stretching its ragged and granulated lips in a grin of dreadful hunger. Ooh.
Oh, yes. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit because this isn't a ghoul, right? It quite clearly describes it. It's like a sort of desiccated corpse. It almost sounds like a mummy.
Yeah.
Some sort of resurrected corpse.
Yeah.
Reanimated body.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, that somebody needs to write a sequel, don't they? Or even a prequel. Yeah.
Oh, a prequel, yeah. Because is this a former caretaker, perhaps?
That's what I thought. I thought it might have been one of the former caretakers. If they've all gone a similar way as is implied, that's kind of what I thought. It's one of his predecessors. Yeah.
I suppose they've been embalmed, haven't they?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. So it could be a caretaker. I wondered if it's perhaps some Salem sorcerer. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what's controlling all this stuff.
Some poor sod who's crawled out of the dreamlands and ended up in the wrong tunnel.
Turn right when he should have turned left.
I thought I was going to also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Bloody cat sent me the wrong way.
We've all been in the wrong tunnel at some point.
And I found this thing sort of creepier than a ghoul, which might sound odd, but I think ghouls, we know quite a lot about them. They're almost a familiar monster, but this thing, it's unknown. We don't know what it is, and it's this slow movement. Although the thing has sightless, bulging eyes, it knows he's there, and it's creeping slowly towards him. And of course, he's got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Do you know, reading it again, what it reminded me of, but in this situation it worked, was the ending of the BBC Mezzotint.
Oh yes, yeah, totally, yeah, spot on, yeah.
You know, the way that thing comes along on the ground, and it doesn't work in the context of the TV movie, but in this context, that would work. Yeah.
You could drop that creature directly into this, couldn't you? It's pretty much
really
the same
could.
thing, this revenant, I guess.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of The Descent as well, which I don't know if either of you have seen.
Oh, yes, yes.
My mate Les in it, playing the nasty Nosferatu thing.
Yeah, now there's an intense claustrophobic film where things just get worse and worse.
That's a great film, yeah.
I was at the premiere, and there was several of us together on the second row, and my friend Les, who was also in Dog Soldiers, he was in the row in front, and there was this relentless scene where he was getting his eyes pulled out and whacked and what have you, and I was horrified because the thing still looks like Les, and it was like watching your friend being murdered. That's the only, and not being able to do anything. But the son of a bitch was turning around and looking at us all and smiling like it was the best thing ever. Did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see my eye come out? It really was unpleasant. And at the end of the film, my friend Neil and I were just both incredibly quiet. And he was like, "What did you think of it?" And he couldn't think of words to say.
Yeah, it's a very powerful film, very intense. And, we don't want to give any spoilers away, but the ending was, oh dear.
Yeah, there's a sequel, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. But he didn't want anything. He didn't want anything to do with it, and I don't think Neil Marshall, who directed it,
didn't need a sequel. No,
well, they were planning on a sequel for Dog Soldiers, and the whole cast turned it down because it didn't require it. It was supposed to be something to do with resurrected bodies being used as biowarfare or something or other. So that's how they all were going to come back. Although quite old, they were going to bring Les back.
Yeah, I seem to remember Sean Pertwee basically sticking two fingers up at it.
Well, Neil Marshall's gone on to great things. I mean, he's directed the John Constantine TV series, Constantine. He's directed Game of Thrones episodes, all the good ones with all the battles.
So he's got this blind revenant thing crawling towards him, and he manages to get into a little side tunnel or something, and then he comes across this stone. I wasn't sure, was this... do you think this was like some sort of slab or a gravestone?
Yeah, that's kind of what I got from it. It's the arse end of a headstone, isn't it? Yeah, and it's loose because of all the rain. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So he sort of kicks away at it and he pulls it and he manages to bring it down, and with it comes the whole tunnel. So he collapses the tunnel and basically is safe for the moment.
Yep.
And he crawls on a bit further and finds himself in a safe space, can we call it? Yes, he finds himself in an empty coffin.
Yeah.
And I did wonder here, obviously the coffin is empty. Was the crawly thing outside the previous incumbent? That'd be a nice little twist, wouldn't it?
Would, yeah. Yeah. He crawls in and there's no way out. Yeah.
And that's pretty much it, isn't it, really? He's sealed himself in this coffin. He's found this refuge.
Pretty much.
Of course, he can't get out, and he slowly suffocates to death.
Yeah.
The end.
I just love the end of it. It's so grim because obviously he's suffocating and all the rest of it. It's just such a grim description. White hot agony lanced through his breast, throbbed in his eyeballs. His head seemed to be swelling, growing larger and larger. Suddenly he heard the exultant squealing of the rats. He began to scream insanely, but could not drown them out. For a moment he thrashed about hysterically within his narrow prison. Then he was quiet, gasping for air. His eyelids closed, his blackened tongue protruded, and he sank down into the blankness of death with the mad squealing of the rats in his ears. What a way to go.
And he must know in his dying moments that it's going to end up as their next meal as well.
Yeah, because they're just going to burrow around the other end, aren't they, and drag him out head first.
It's a double indignity, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
an insult to injury, that. And I also like to imagine that there's going to be a little postcard going up on the church notice board, wanted caretaker. No previous experience required.
Caretaker, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that ending was really it was so claustrophobic and unpleasant. And
Yeah.
yeah, I found the whole thing really unpleasant. I have to say, but no empathy for him.
Oh, no. It's like you're almost cheering him on, aren't you? Come on, bite the bastard.
Yes, absolutely. And it's typical of that thing we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? The conte cruel that we were talking about in context of Clark Ashton Smith. These sort of stories that have really nasty people in and they always get their comeuppance. Very sort of tells the unexpected, I suppose. You know, it always comes back to bite them in the end.
Yeah, quite literally, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I understand there's been a film adaptation made of this one as well.
There has. It was part of a made-for-TV anthology movie called Trilogy of Terror II. Yeah, it was made in 1996 by Dan Curtis, who was more famously known for 1974's Turn of the Screw and the Kolchak the Night Stalker series.
Dan Curtis, wasn't he the bloke who also made Dark Shadows? Didn't he used to say at the end of that?
Yes, he was Dark Shadows.
Dan Curtis Productions.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it was. Dan Curtis Productions is the production team behind this. Yeah. And it's actually quite surprising because it's like for a made-to-TV thing like the cast, because the main character is Lisette Anthony. I think that's how you pronounce her name. She was in Crawl, obviously Dracula Dead and Loving It, and Auf Wiedersehen, Pet.
All right.
Two up, three down she was in.
Yeah, she was in 2 Up, 3 Down. Yeah. Then later on, she basically does Hollyoaks now, I think, isn't she? Something like that. One of them TV soap things that I have no idea about.
Yeah, me neither.
And she was in an episode of Poirot. I know that actually we were watching it the other day. It was just like, oh, it's like Anthony. Yeah.
Wasn't she in something like Dallas: A Dynasty or something as well? Or the Colbys or something like that back in the 80s?
Yeah, I think she was in one of the spin-off ones, not the main ones, the spin-offy ones, I think. Yeah. Now, and her co-star is a guy called Geraint Wyn Davis, who's an American Welsh guy, which is you always hear about the American Irish, you never hear about the American Welsh, do you? But he was best known as character Major Mike Rivers in Airwolf. And it's like we were discussing before we went on, none of us can remember this, but apparently he was in 29 episodes.
Yeah, I definitely used to watch it. I can sort of remember the title sequence, but I can't remember anything else about it. I certainly can't remember, was it Major Mike?
Yeah, Saturday afternoon TV, wasn't it? Yeah, Knight Rider and A-Team, Street Hawk.
Yeah.
It was kind of around the same time that St. Greaves's would be on TV and wrestling.
Yeah, the wrestling. We always watched the wrestling first. Yeah. World of Sport.
And speaking of American Irish, I recognise the actor who plays Masson in this with the dodgy Irish accent. Wasn't he in the Clint Eastwood films, Every Which Way But Loose? I can't remember his name.
Yes, he was. Yeah. Yeah.
So they changed the story in this for a bit, but I think it works really well. And I think if they had just done a straight adaptation of the story, that there's not a lot of plot, there's not a lot of drama, there's horror, but there's not a lot else going on. So
no. And they've got to fill half an hour. So, I mean, that's literally the end. And it's an ending, isn't it? There's no build.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So what we now get as the main plot is a woman and her lover who are conspiring to murder her husband, who's wheelchair bound. And I think it's the most cantankerous character I've ever seen in one of these things. He really is horrible.
Right at the beginning, it starts with him confronting his wife, who's like said Anthony, that he's going to sack this guy, Dan, or what, Ben. He's going to sack this guy, Dan. And she goes, why? What's he done? And there's just this great line. He just turns around and goes, what's he done? He's done you. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he turns on the TV and there's, an old rumpy pumpy.
Yeah, and that came across as quite creepy as well.
Yeah.
I think, so.
Well, it gets even creepier because he starts going, ooh, that looks like fun. It's just like, oh.
Yeah, that was quite pervy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So he's got these videotapes of her and her lover.
Yes.
And he's threatening to release them. I'm not quite sure what her job is, but he sort of implies that her career will be over if he releases these videos. And but he still wants to stay married to her. I get the impression that was just to piss her off, really.
Yeah, and she's in the will. She gets everything in the will, as long as she promises to behave and cool her hot panties. That's
oh God,
cool her hot panties. And otherwise she basically is going to send these tapes of her having it off with a bow to hard copy.
Is that another one you stock in your back room? but she takes no notice of this at all, right? In fact, she goes straight to her lover and she tells him what's happening. And he comes up with a plan to knock the old man off.
Well, he nicks the idea because he's watching Kiss of Death, isn't he? When the guy gets pushed down the stairs in a wheelchair, and he goes, "I love this scene." And
And always nice to see a bit of Richard Widmark, isn't it? Not enough Richard Widmark about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what they decide to do. It's not an especially subtle plot or anything like that. They just basically push him down the stairs, really.
Well, they fake a burglary, don't they? They fake a burglary. She replaces the bullets in the guy's gun with blanks, goes up there with his dinner. Her boyfriend makes a noise. She pretends to phone the Rozzers, but doesn't.
Yeah.
He goes out there with his gun to confront the burglar. Bang, there's blanks. But she just pushes him down the stairs in the wheelchair. And then he just goes incredibly goofy, doesn't he, this guy from Airwolf? So it's like whooping and giggling like an imbecile, just like the movie. It's just like, Christ.
Yeah, it's not a very likeable character, is he?
No.
He's quite an idiot, really. Not much better than the husband in some ways.
No, which I think ties into the end quite nicely, really. Because, again, it gets that feel, the same sort of feel as you get in the story. It's like all the characters are, like, completely reprehensible.
Yeah, there's no redeeming features in any of them, is there?
No.
Not even the old caretaker at the end. Well, I guess like the story is the same character.
Yeah, because again, he's basically, this time he's an Irish chap, but he's basically, again, he's a steptoe type, and we get
the police turn up next, and This was a bit odd for me. They just completely accept what the wife and the lover say. There's no investigation, it seems.
Yeah.
And normally in a suspicious death, then the spouse or the partner is going to be prime suspect, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love how bored the police officer seems as well. It's just like, yeah, it's fine, whatever.
I imagine maybe they knew the husband and knew what an arsehole he was. They'd had dealings with him.
He's right, yeah. Yeah. Well, they hammer that home just before he gets knocked off, don't they? Because he's on the phone, like yelling at some poor intern or something, like just bellowing down the phone all this abuse. It's just like, yeah. So it's obviously not just her who's a complete cock to.
Yeah. Well, I imagine everyone knows the score because I think it's one of those "what attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels" situations, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She must have loved him once.
Well, he actually addresses that at the scene when he's confronted her about the nookie tapes, because he actually she says you're a bastard or something like that, and he goes, well, you knew this before you upgraded to wife. So it's sort of implied that he was knocking her off.
That she was the mistress
before,
once,
you know.
then she was the lover previously.
Yeah.
And a twist here comes in the fact that although he's left her everything in the will, before he died, he liquefied his assets.
Yeah, liquidated his assets. Yeah.
So there's basically nothing there. There's nothing for her. He's sold everything off and he's transferred it into cash, and this cash is in a secret Swiss bank account.
Yeah.
And the access code to this bank account is on a microfilm, and they don't know where the microfilm is. So of course they start searching the house. They're turning the place upside down, looking for this film.
Yep.
So she then remembers that the old man insisted on being buried with his gold watch.
Yeah.
And she figures that if it's not in the house anywhere, then the microfilm must have been hidden inside the watch. So naturally, the next plan is to go and dig him up. This gets us to Salem and the old cemetery, and this is where we're now starting, sort of getting into the original story.
We get into basically what happens. Yeah. They meet Stubbs in the bar first, don't they? And he's I love this scene. It's not particularly well acted or anything. I just love the moxie of this guy. He knows he's going to rob him, right, and all the rest of it. But he goes over there and he tries to hustle a few quid out of them first, because he tells them about the rats in the old part of the cemetery, and says, you know, if you put him in there in that old box, they'll have him. So you might want to upgrade to a nice, secure steel one.
Which I'm going to open and rob anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably take the coffin back and resell it as well.
Yeah.
But the old man had stipulated and made it very clear that he wanted to be buried in the family plot, right? So that's where he goes. And then we get into the final scene where everyone turns up at once to exhume him. And I think actually by the time the couple get there, Stubbs has pretty much dug him up already, right? Yeah,
he has actually. He was just about to crack the coffin open, and then Ben turns up and wallops him on the head with a crowbar.
Yes, always a nice way to go. And then now that the coffin is open, the body's exhumed, all the hard work has been done, then she shoots Ben, kills him.
Yep. Which ties into the fact it's just like, because I was thinking the first time I watched it, I was like, so you're leaving one arsehole for another arsehole. It's like you've got a problem. You've got an arsehole magnet, and but that's addressed because she waits till he's opened it up, gets the watch out, finds the microfilm, pulls out a revolver, and basically goes, "Bye, bang."
Which leads us to wonder if she hadn't planned this all along. If it was her who planted the idea of offing the old man in Ben's head in the first place, rather than it being this idea. Was this, the seeds were sown way back, perhaps?
Yeah.
And then we get our favourite scene from the story, the corpse disappearing headfirst out of the coffin and her grabbing for the legs.
It's such a great image. It's like she's stood over the thing and she's just like looks down at Ben, who's just basically done his death rattle, and looks at the watch, and then the body starts going up and the feet disappear into the thing. No!
And just like in the original story, she's so overcome with this greed, this sense of entitlement, that she jumps in and she follows the body through the burrows. And this is where we now see the rats for the first time. And this is a 90s film, right? So the effects are of its day. And I'm guessing these rats, they look animatronic, do you think?
Yeah, they're animatronics. Do you know what? There's one scene that it just creases me up. I mean, by 90s animatronic standard, they're not that bad, the rats. But there's one bit where it pans to the dark tunnel, and you've got these sets of glowing red eyes, and it's like the Jawas from Star Wars. Because at the same time, you've got these sound effects of the rats, and they don't sound anything like rats. They sound like fucking Jawas. It's just like,
Yeah. I thought the eyes looked pretty good. They were quite effective, shining in the dark, I thought. And it reminded me a bit of sort of Critters or Gremlins, those kind of things.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you see that now not to think of Jim Henson, really.
It's very Jim Henson, yeah.
And at first we just see a couple of rats, and I thought, oh, is that going to be it? But we do get more and more coming in. I guess maybe they were doubling them up or something.
Yeah.
But you get the impression of the noise she's making is attracting more and more rats in. We do start to see more and more appear.
Yeah. Because she shoots a couple of them, doesn't she? And you get like,
Yeah. And like in the original story, she escapes. We don't get the crawling revenant. We do get a glimpse of a big sort of king rat or a queen rat. But like in the original story, she escapes into this safe place, which is effectively the sealed coffin, and that's where she ends her days. Yeah,
but instead of bringing it down and suffocating, she gets in there and there's nowhere else to go. She's in there and the rats come in.
Yeah.
So
I thought this was a really effective scene, actually, because she's in the coffin. The only way out is the way she's come in, the hole at the bottom of the coffin. But that's where the rats now start coming in. In fact, they start streaming in, they're flooding in. And this was really effective and really horrible. It really did look like a swarm of rats pouring in through the hole in the bottom of the coffin. Yeah. And then, of course, a torch goes out. Total darkness.
And I love it. And then it pans to a really nice shot at the end. You've got this headstone of where the coffin is. And underground, all you can hear is her screaming. And it pans up from underground to this. And then it pans over and you've got Stubbsy lying there dead. And the empty coffin over here with
Ben draped over it.
Yeah. It's just bleak.
And that headstone that it pans up to, we get quite a clear shot of the name on that, which was Anna Napier. And I've had a look around, done some research, but I can't find any relevance to that name. At least nothing that's obvious.
It was probably a studio in-joke. It was probably one of the makeup girls or something.
Yeah.
You know, you could find that quite a lot. But I looked into that as well because it really focuses in on it. So it's kind of like, ooh, is that relevant?
Yeah.
But I don't think it is.
Yeah, you wonder if it's a little Easter egg or something like that.
Unless it ties into one of the other segments somehow.
Oh, yeah, it could be, yeah. Because there's 3 stories in the film.
There's 3 stories, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was an effective treatment of the story, wasn't it? Yeah, nice adaptation and a nice little gruesome tale.
Again, it's one of those. It's a TV movie, so you know what you're going to get. You're not going to get like Oscar acting and award-winning effects, but it does what it says on the tin. I think it's fun more than anything else.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's sort of along the lines of Creepshow, isn't it? That kind of thing as well. From about that same time.
Yeah. But I love them old anthology series and films and things like that. So.
Yes, things like Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dead of Night and
Asylum. Yeah.
Asylum.
In fact, we've not spoken about Asylum yet. We should cover that in the future. That's a classic.
Which is the one set on the train that's got Roy Castle and Kenny Ball in it? Dr. Terror.
Oh, yeah. That was Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. Yeah, that was a good one.
There's no House of Horror in there, is there? It's a train.
Wasn't he reading the tarot cards, though? So perhaps it's got something to do with the suits of the cards, the houses of the cards or something like that, maybe.
The house, yeah.
So there we are, The Graveyard Rats by Henry Kuttner. Nice, gruesome little story with some subtle nods to the mythos. And, we'll definitely be coming back to Kuttner, I think, to look at some more of his work.
Well, Kuttner, he rats are a feature in a lot of his stories. There's one I would suggest to anybody who's listening to this to read after would be the Salem Horror, because it's almost like a take on Dreams in the Witch House, and there is a witch in it who's Abigail Prynne, who's
nice.
A relation to Ludwig, who's the old Mysteries of the Worm, but there's a rat in that which acts almost like Brown Jenkin. Which is really interesting. It's a really good story. It's part of his kind of like Salem mythos thing. So.
And it's nice that he developed his own setting as well. I mean, obviously he's very much in New England and he's plugging into the Lovecraftian mythos, but he's got his own take on it. Because I think, as we said before, if you set everything in half,
Yeah.
it starts getting a bit crowded after a while.
Yeah. He did some more fantasy tinge stuff, very along the same lines as Clark Ashton Smith. And Spawn of Dagon is a really good one.
Right.
It's all necromancers and all the rest of it. And then you've got the titular Spawn of Dagon, which are like this, star spawn type, So basically you got lots of old castles, and then you got these tentacular monstrosities slithering through the corridors. It's great.
Nice.
Another good one is The Invaders, which is very, it's got a lot of ties in with the Hounds of Tindermoss.
Yeah, because they weren't really used much, were they? I mean, Lovecraft came up with the name, then Long came up with the story. But after that, in that original circle at least, you don't hear anything of the Hounds.
No, there was a couple of people. I mean, Robert M. Price used them. There was something I've read. They've been used in the Arkham horror novels and things like that.
All right.
But and I've used them a couple of times.
Yeah. More recently, I'm thinking back in that original circle. Was Kutner the only other one to use them? Really?
They're mentioned but never seen, because Lovecraft mentions them a few times but never actually uses them.
Did he write anything about Los Angeles from a Lovecraftian point of view? Because didn't you say that he was from LA?
Yes, he was. Yeah, and he died in LA in 1958. I've not been able to find too much about his background, to be honest. I presume he lived in LA for most of his life.
Because if you think about it, I mean, that would have been a perfect setting for the private investigator come occult detective, wouldn't it? With LA Noir brought in.
Well, C.J. Henderson, I don't think it is LA, but I think it's like San Diego, things like that. Just trying to think. I don't think Kutner does, but saying that, I don't think it specifically says where some of them are set. I think some of them are just kind of anywhere USA.
Right. And I guess, as we said at the start, the difficulty with Kutner is him and his wife wrote under so many different pen names. You might have trouble tracking down all the stories he wrote anyway.
Yeah.
And I sort of wonder if that was a thing at the time. You write under pen names, especially if you're writing across genres and for different magazines. I mean, perhaps it means you can put in multiple submissions to one magazine. You've got more chance of getting published. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there was a few as well, because there was obviously you had your weird tales and your astounding stories, but then you had spicy adventure stories and things like that, which was really lucrative. But obviously these guys didn't want to be known for selling porn. Well, it was Stephen King, wasn't it? In his early days, he used to sell under pseudonyms to Playboy and Penthouse and stuff like these steamy, racy stories and all the rest of it. And it was, come bring in a bit of cash.
Yeah. Well, boy's got to make a living, bills to pay.
Exactly. Yeah. I was trying to think, LA's, I mean, obviously Michael Shea, Fat Face was LA, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a really effective backdrop, wasn't it, the way he used it in Fat Face, yeah.
Yeah, well, most of his mythos was set in LA. Yeah.
And I guess it might have been sleazier in the 70s than it was in the 20s even. Although then again, you've got, what was the book? Hollywood Babylon, haven't you? And all that stuff that goes back to all the scandals in the early days.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that Call of Cthulhu game that they brought out, the video game. I mean, that was a gumshoe, wasn't it? Very much in the Raymond Chandler.
Was, yeah. I mean, C.J. Henderson did a lot of hard-boiled. He was probably the best known of the hard-boiled Cthulhu stuff. He did some really good ones. Yeah, because he carried on with the Kolchak and Teddy London, and he even did a whole bunch of stories about Inspector Legrasse.
Oh, right. Yeah, I still want to track those down, actually, because I remember you mentioned those before.
Yeah. I'll send you some links. Yeah, if I've got them, so send you some links. Some really good stuff. Yeah, if you like your hard-boiled with mythos, then C.J. Henderson's your man.
And I guess from a story plot point of view, or certainly from a role-playing point of view, it's an easy shoe-in, isn't it? To have your character as the private investigator, very easy then to draw them into any sort of any plot or adventure.
Well, the Arkham horror books have a whole bunch with that Roland, what's-his-face, who's in the Arkham Horror games, the card game, and all the rest of it. I think he's in Manchester Madness as well. But there's a whole series of books based on that. And I think they call a Cthulhu role-playing game. There was the Arkham Detective Agency campaigns, wasn't there? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It was quite a common start point, I guess, wasn't it? It's, you're called in to investigate the disappearance of a person or something like that, that sort of thing. And I suppose the other main one was you inherit a mansion from your old Uncle Obed.
Yeah. Uncle Obed. Yeah.
Here's a hint. Don't go there. Just sell it.
Yeah.
Okay, so an excellent story from Henry Kuttner, who I'm sure we'll be returning to. And we also promised at some point to look at C.L. Moore's work as well, especially The Black God's Kiss, which is quite a gritty sword and sorcery story, but it has a sort of almost fairyland, dreamland sort of quality to it as well.
Yeah, it's quite a Dunsany-ian place in feel, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it hasn't got the floweriness of the Lord. It's got...
Yeah, it's a bit more grounded, isn't it?
It's more grounded.
All right, well, I can hear the Arkham bus pulling up outside, so it's time for us to depart from Innsmouth before night falls. Now, we do have an optional stop-off on the way out at Innsmouth Cemetery, if you'd like to have a little look round there. All we would say is please don't linger too long, and if you do hear any scurrying sounds, then please get back on the bus as quickly as you can. And I understand on our next visit we're going to be cramming into a small police box with some guests, is that right?
Yeah, blue one. They brought it all the way over from the UK. Yeah, we're going to be looking at adventures in time and space and cosmic horror. Yeah, we're looking at the Lovecraftian references and ties to long-running sci-fi institution Doctor Who.
Ah, brilliant. Nice.
Looking forward to this one.
Well, of course, Yog-Sothoth was a villain, wasn't he, in Doctor Who at one point?
Oh, yeah. And Hastur.
Yeah, there's some references in the TV show, but I gather there's even more explicit references in the books. Is that right?
Oh, very much so. The Virgin New Adventures were loaded with it. I mean, yeah, you got Yog-Sothoth in them, you got Cthulhu in it, all sorts like that. But yeah, in the actual original run of the TV series, you had Yog-Sothoth and you had Hastur.
Yeah, and we're going to be having some guests coming in as well to help us talk about the Good Doctor. So just one other quick announcement before we go, and that's about a new project that is currently in the planning stage, and that's going to be a podcast we're going to run alongside the Innsmouth Book Club, and it's called Strange Shadows.
Awesome.
And it's a podcast devoted exclusively to the weird fiction of Clark Ashton Smith.
Indeed.
So Tim and I are going to be presenting that along with some guests, and what we're doing is we're taking the current 5-volume Nightshade collection, because that has Smith's stories in chronological order, and we're just simply going to work from the beginning and go all through. I think he wrote those 100 stories over 4 years.
Yes. Yeah. I think we're basically going to go in order, aren't we? Start at the beginning and yeah.
Yes, yeah. And of course there's a lot of amazing stuff in there. We wanted to feature Clark Ashton Smith more on this show, but once you start reading the stories, we thought, well, this really deserves its own dedicated show.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for that. We'll get details out to you as soon as possible, of course. That will be launched on the new Buzzsprout channel. As you can see, we're using Buzzsprout for the IBC as well now. It'll also be up on our YouTube page, and of course, we'll continue to use our Patreon site as well. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to say a big thanks to our existing patrons for supporting the show.
Yes.
And just also to welcome a new patron, DB Spitzer. Thanks very much for your support, it's much appreciated. If you'd like to join our patrons and help us spread our tentacles even further, check out the Patreon site for details. You can subscribe at 3 levels of membership, and everyone who signs up gets access to bonus content and a monthly episode of Innsmouth News, which features news, articles and author spotlights. So thanks again for joining us today, folks. We'll see you next time. Don't go digging where you shouldn't. It's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
That's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.
And it's goodbye from me, John Chadwick.